Hello, boys and girls, ladies and gents, this is Christoph Zürn. My job in this podcast is to have conversations with exceptional people around the world who do something special and are also musicians. I want to learn about their stories, analogies, and how they use music thinking in their work and personal lives. Why? So you can leverage their experiences, influences, books, frameworks, and habits to learn from them. My guest today is Matthias Röder. Matthias is an internationally recognized expert at the intersection of creativity, leadership, and artificial intelligence. He was the director of the Karajan Institute, and he led the team that used AI to finish Beethoven's 10th Symphony. But he's also a trained classical guitarist and a musicologist. We discuss what he believes AI is actually mail autocomplete for music, why we should view it as a living archive rather than a replacement, and why leaving behind the concept of right and wrong is the ultimate freedom. Please enjoy this conversation with Matthias Röder. Welcome to the Power of Music Thinking. This is the podcast for people with a musical heart and a wicked job. We're looking for stories, insights and tools from the big world of music to inspire leaders and followers to listen, tune, play and perform in whatever field you're operating. Welcome, Matthias. Welcome to the Power of Music Thinking.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be here.
Matthias, I always start with the same question. That's my, let's say, podcast ritual. And it goes like this. What was your first or most memorable sonic experience that had an impact on you?
That's very easy because when I was 12 years old, I had the chance to listen to a performance of Leonard Bernstein with the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra. And it was so memorable because my father and my mother had been to the concert the day before, and they came home. Well, I think I was listening to the radio broadcast of that first concert. And on the second day, they were doing the same program again. And my father said, "We have to go." And I said, "Yeah, we don't have any tickets." He said, "Don't worry, we'll get in." And so we smuggled ourselves into the hall at intermission with like a lot of other people. And it was Beethoven's 7th Symphony, and Leonard Bernstein was old, but still jumping on stage like a crazy. And it was just the most memorable concert ever. And that evening, at least in my recollection, I decided that I had to become a musician myself. I think I was 12 or so.
Wow, that's really something. So from zero to Bernstein, and we have to explain to listeners that might not know so much about classical music. There might be 2 or 3 superstars of the last century, and Leonard Bernstein would be one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And Herbert von Karajan, the other one.
And that's also linked with you. So we will talk about today a lot about classical music, also about AI. But first, can you share with us briefly who you are and what you do for a living?
Yeah, of course. Well, I'm Matthias Röder, and I am a musician by training, classical guitar. Then I turned into musicologist. And very early on, I was fascinated by technology, in particular, artificial neural networks. This fascination of mine goes back to the early 2000s. And I tried to apply all of this technology, which I was sort of learning about on the side, to the study of music, compositional musicology, computational musicology, things like this. Later on, I then went to Salzburg to lead the estate of Herbert von Karajan, the other great musician of the 20th century. I mean, there are many, but... and in that capacity, I founded the first classical music hackathon, and then we started a conference on music and technology. And I was really, really deep into that connection between startups, between music and technology. And a couple of years ago, I was approached by Deutsche Telekom with the idea to finish Beethoven's 10th Symphony, which he started. He wrote down ideas for it, but never finished. And to do that with an AI. And that was 6 years ago, which is a long, long time in the world of AI. But it's a project that changed me a lot. And today I use this experience that I learned in this project with a great team of amazing computer scientists, composers, and so on to help companies and to help leaders navigate this really big shift that is happening right now.
Absolutely. And that's right in the sweet spot of what we're doing with music thinking and also the music thinking podcast. So talking with people that do something special and are musicians. And there's one big hypothesis so that musicians do it differently or do it in their way. And the link with music and technology, I think that's pretty old. So if we also use, let's say, the technique of an instrument as technology, so we're always used to use something to express the extraordinary. And I would like to start with the Beethoven one, because this is something that I saw on LinkedIn. I went to your TED Talk about Beethoven, and can you take us on the journey?
Yeah, of course. So Beethoven is really one of the few composers that have left a lot of sketches. Sketches are musical ideas that go into compositions at some point, or they don't. And Beethoven was a composer who had a very meticulous system, really, of writing these down. So when he was walking, and he liked to walk a lot, ideas came to him. He wrote those ideas down into pocket sketchbooks, ideas that he had on the go. Then later on at home, he would sit at his desk and he would copy ideas into bigger sketchbooks. And he would keep those, and he would frequently go back and forth in them to revisit ideas. And this has fascinated musicologists for a long time now, and they have studied what they call the creative process of Beethoven, trying to understand, how you go from initial idea to a finished composition. And in many compositions, it's possible to do that. And understanding what Beethoven wrote down in these sketchbooks is actually not so easy, because the handwriting is pretty, let's say, unique, and because the ideas are often relatively raw, and it's unclear at times what he's writing down, because he doesn't use the clefs to indicate which notes are on the page, stuff like this. So there is a lot of discussion going on in the world of musicology about these sketchbooks. But because Beethoven was so careful with them, and because of his, great importance in the history of music, they have been preserved pretty well. So they are all over the world in different archives and libraries, but we know them and we have studied them. And so it has been known for a very long time that while Beethoven was composing his 9th symphony, he was also working on what he called the other symphony, which supposed to be a 10th. And so there are some roughly 45 ideas for that symphony. And some of them are a little bit further along in the sketching process. Others are really just very, very short ideas. And in the past, people have worked with these sketches before. A notable example, a person named Barry Cooper, who had been finishing 2 movements out of the 45 sketches in an attempt to reconstruct what a 10th symphony might look like. And he focused on these very long sketches, the ones where, as a human, you don't have to put a lot of I have to be careful how I put this. as a human, you are not at risk of putting your own ideas into it too much, because the sketch is substantial enough so that it's clear what the composer wanted. But he didn't touch a lot of the other ideas, which were very short. And we felt like this is a great example for AI, because AI can learn about the style of Beethoven, and then you can apply it to these short ideas, and it's not going to put anything in there that isn't Beethoven, that is its own ideas, because the AI doesn't really have its own ideas. It's just, a machine that learns a style and then can reproduce it. And that was the start of the project. And it was fascinating because really on that level, no one had ever done something like that before. And it was totally unclear if we would succeed or not. And that was a really, really fun experience.
That sounds fantastic. Also, what you say, these little sketches, or how long are they? Is it just a melody line, or?
Yeah, sometimes it's just a few notes, like 8 to 10 notes. Sometimes it's a whole phrase. Sometimes he writes down in words, Herr Gott, dich loben wir, which is a chorale. And he implies that he wants that to be set in with the choir and things like this. So it's really very rich material. We worked together with the Beethoven House in Bonn. Which is where the composer was born. It's actually in the same building. And it's, some of the world's most recognized scholars on Beethoven work there. And I should say the team that I was able to put together with Ahmed Elgamal from Rutgers University, like a top of the line researcher in creative artificial intelligence, Walter Verzova, a very renowned composer, and so on and so on. We had a great team, Mark Gotham, and people like Robert Levin, who supported us from Harvard University with his expertise. We were just so lucky to be given this opportunity by Deutsche Telekom, in particular Michael Schult and Tim Höttges. We thought very deeply about how this could be done. And what became very clear was that the material was, so rich and at the same time so open to a lot of possibilities that we wanted to have this dialogue between the AI and the human experts. And I think from the get-go, this was very clear to us that this is not something where you press a button and a symphony comes out, but it's a process of interacting human and machine intelligence. And with that, we kind of opened the door for this dialogue and for the discussions which have been happening since then.
You just said 5 years, 6 years, and that's quite a super long time. So when we think about now music and AI, like Suno, Udio, and all these platforms. And by the way, a few episodes ago, we had Maya Ackerman as a guest.
Yeah, I know Maya. Yes, she was actually a speaker at my conference in 1 year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So small world. So what she, for example, said is that we have to step away from the all-knowing oracle of the AI. And I like it very much that you said, this is the material, and then you don't, like some people say, AI is hallucinating, coming up with stuff where you thought, hey, where is this coming from? And you controlled this very much because you just gave the material and said, okay, find ways to combine this material. And as far as I understand, Beethoven has many short motifs, and we know them all. And that's interesting to also see and that's very understandable if you're not very much in music, but maybe using AI at the moment. You understand that there's some kind of predictability if you give a certain input. Can you elaborate a bit more on that part?
Yes, maybe it's a good moment to talk a little bit about what kind of technology we used and how that works. This all goes back to a paper that was written in 2017. And it's a paper that was written by Google engineers about a new kind of architecture to train these artificial neural networks. It's called the transformer architecture. And basically, by the way, the paper is called "All You Need Is Attention," which is, like this little nudge towards the Beatles with "All You Need Is Love." And the idea is that anything that you produce is a function of all the things that came before, very roughly spoken. So if I have the beginning of a sentence, then that in a way predicates what the potential continuations are. So of course, the AI system learns all of that from the training data. So in a very simplistic way, you could say, well, the AI looks at the statistic distribution of syllables over the whole context of the language. And all the texts that are in the training data set. It's more complicated.
Just to interrupt, I think that many people experience this already when they write an email, for example, and the email system knows all the other emails, and you write 2 or 3 words and goes on. So is this comparable to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so funny that you mentioned that, because when I first worked with Ahmed, who had been doing a lot of visual AI things and had never worked on music before, we talked a little bit about music, and then he came back to me and he said, like, oh, it's actually composition is actually quite easy. It's like email autocomplete. and I'm like, oh no, oh, that's such a terrible statement, but in a way he's completely right. And so you basically build an email autocomplete system for music, which works because music works over time, and it has these syllable-like motives or combinations of tones. And this is what the AI plays with. So it's all about recognizing patterns in the training data set and then applying that to whatever you prompt it with. And of course, that creates music that makes sense and that also is surprisingly creative. And why is that so? Because when you look at music, a lot of music is just recombination of stuff that has been there before. You could actually go a very, very, very long way by using material that has been composed before, and people would still find it creative and innovative music and ingenious. And that tells you a lot about what creativity in music actually is, right? And what we can learn if we just study a corpus and then start to imitate it.
Yes.
But of course, very quickly people said, well, but the AI can never produce anything new because it doesn't have feelings, it doesn't have emotions, it hasn't gone through terrible moments in life and where all the suffering comes from. But what our project really showed was that maybe none of that is really necessary to produce music, And that's, of course, something that a lot of people didn't like.
Okay.
Because it goes to sort of the heart of what we think is human and creativity.
All right. And it's also about melodies in the first sense, I would say. So if you start something like in talking, then you could already, and that happens if some people talk and they know each other. Sometimes they could even finish their sentence while the other one is still talking. Yeah. And with music, it's the same. So like if we use Beethoven Fifth, and maybe some people don't even know what it is, but if they hear the beginning, then they already know, oh, this is what it's about.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And it's, humans are very good at picking up on these hidden patterns, but we do that unconsciously, subconsciously. We cannot put our finger on what it is that we perceive. And so I think this is our greatest benefit in dealing with a lot of data that we listen to over the years of being listeners and musicians. And for the AI, it's very similar. It just digests all of that and then makes reference to it. And it was quite interesting because when we had the first version of our system ready, which was, by the way, long before ChatGPT came out. So it was like a miracle thing for people to see. But when it was done, it would create references to music of Beethoven, which were surprising. But only if you didn't know the actual sketch material, because in the sketches, Beethoven would reference also earlier music of his. And the AI would then make connections to pieces by Mozart, which had very similar melodies.
Okay.
So the Pathétique slow movement melody in Beethoven is actually from a work by Mozart. And Beethoven made the connection to Mozart, and the AI made the connection back to Mozart. It's very interesting how the AI was picking up on these patterns that are within Beethoven's works.
Right, so there's a lot of context and contextual thing, and I think you mentioned it before that in these sketchbooks there was also a lot of context. So not just the little melody lines, but also like what you just said. Okay, this is a choral, and everybody knows the choral, and then you even communicate more than just the melody, but maybe also the harmony. And because I've understood that you were working more on the melodies, but because it's a symphony, how then did it become a symphony, and the decision to play one line with a horn and another line with the violin?
Okay, so the sketches are mostly melodies. That's correct. But we were training the system with music from roughly 1750, like the death of Bach, to 1830, this time where Beethoven lived. And of course, we were training with the actual works, basically meaning not only melodies, but also harmonies and everything. So when we put in a melody into our system, the AI would continue the melody, but then also add more melodies to it. In other words, counterpoint or harmonies. And those were learned from all of that training data that we presented the AI with.
Maybe one question about the training data. Was this a score on paper, or was this, let's say, a recording of the Seventh Symphony, or was this something in between?
So we trained with something called MIDI. MIDI is a musical writing system for actually musical instruments. So it tells musical instruments which note to play when and with which intensity. And it's a very, very simplistic way to write down music. But because it is so simple, it is everywhere. And there's a lot of music encoded in this kind of system. So we use that just because it was so practical. Imagine like putting together a training data set for something like this. Actually, that is a lot of work. And it takes... In our project, it was probably a third of everything we did was just getting together all the training data.
Yeah.
And transforming it in such a way that we could use it and things like this. So we had the MIDI, which means that our AI was reading in MIDI, learning the distributions, and then when we presented it with a sketch, we presented it in MIDI format, and then it produced MIDI output. And that is basically like a piano roll where you know when does which note play, but you don't know which orchestra instrument will play it. And so that's what orchestration is all about. And we had to create another AI to do that part of the job.
That's interesting. By the way, orchestration is one of the words. And if the listeners had followed the last episodes, so there's quite a lot of, I also did a research on orchestration, or actually asked people, what do they do when they say that they are orchestrating in a non-musical way? And I think it's so good to understand what's the deep dive into music. What is orchestration, and not to tell people what's right or wrong, but to inspire them what orchestration all could be. And what I like especially is that orchestration itself, it's like, let's say, something from 200 years ago, although today we also have orchestrators, film orchestrators. But people nowadays are using much more technical equipment, like the MIDI, the MIDI, the musical instrument digital interface. That's whereas the numbers, I think it's 127, and between 0 and 127, it's just information, it's just data. And that's so interesting to hear how these, let's say, human component can distribute it, or is there? But you just said there was a second AI who was just doing the orchestration. That's interesting to learn from.
Yeah, but because you have all this MIDI data, and that's all the notes that are supposed to be played by this orchestra, but they come out as if they are for piano only.
Yeah,
and so we said, well, we had some extra time because of the COVID pandemic, so no orchestra performances were possible. So we said, let's see if we can actually come up with a system that takes the MIDI output that we have and then decides which note should be played by what instrument. And we built such a system, and it did also some interesting things, but it was not good enough. It's because of the training data set. We didn't have enough quality data for this. You need sort of a piano score and the full symphony score, and learn from that how to blow it up. And so we went back to the initial plan, which was, well, we have someone orchestrate the output of the AI system or the AI composer system, and we asked the person, Reinhard Summerer, to actually follow the ideas, the ideas that the AI put into its orchestration. It was really the most fragile part of the whole setup. But nowadays there are very good AIs to orchestrate because 6 years later and many different teams later, there's just a lot of other data sources that you can use to do this. So all of the problems that we had back then are now so easy, it's just like a completely different world. Yeah.
So now it would work because orchestration also means you making a decision which instrument is playing what, and also what kind of set instruments you use. So, and if we go to Beethoven, I think most of the people know the ending with Freude, schöner Götterfunken, which is sung. And as far as I know, there is no singing before that. And I think you just mentioned that in the 10th also there was a choral. So he also thought about to use the human voice. And I think that's interesting. An AI would not come to that idea to now, if the genre is symphony, now to start to let people sing.
That is true on the one hand, yes. All by itself, if you just prompt it with a piece of melody or a sentence, it wouldn't do that. But of course, as we are all learning now in our interactions with AI, we are no longer doing these one-off prompts, which is basically one-shot prompts where you say, like, do this, and then you just take what the AI gives you. But we go back and forth. We give examples. We push back. We try to get the AI out of its comfort zone. All of these tricks, we combine it with other data sources and things like that. All of this stuff is now really changing this a lot. And I think you can produce novel ideas together with an AI. Human and AI interaction can do that. So when you look at the way that people work with music AIs, there is a lot of this going back and forth happening. And that's why I also think it's so short-sighted to say, well, AI-generated music is this, or shouldn't be on that platform, or I want only human-generated music. What does that even mean? Most people interact with AIs in many different ways throughout the day. And so it's just not possible to even say something, a text or a film or an image is generated without any AI. I don't even know how to do that. Because in my cell phone, in the camera, there's AI algorithms. In my computer, when I record something, when I master something, everywhere by now is AI inside. So I think we're way past this sort of divide between human and machine. And this integration of these two modes of creating is in full swing already. But I'm kind of diverting from the original question, I realize.
No. Actually, that's a nice segue into what you're doing now. And by the way, the power of music thinking is not only about music. We use music to explain the world. And that's literally what we're doing at the moment. We dive into one analogy very deeply. That's the music. And in this case, even a very nice bridge, a music of someone who couldn't finish his work. And now we have new, let's call it, tools or instruments to change this. And in doing this, we'll learn a lot about ourselves. We learn about a lot about music. And that's something what I'm very much interested in. So like is working with AI from a musical perspective, more like a composition, like you're bringing different things together. And in the composition, let's say, integrate the orchestration and the instrumentalization, so to not make it too complicated. Or is it more like an improvisation, like Brian Eno always talked about when he talked about his generative music, which is, by the way, also, let's say, not really AI, it's more algorithmic music, where he said he's working more like a gardener. He's put something somewhere in his big garden. He gives it some kind of water, and then he sees what comes out of it, and then reacts on it, or even harvests it. So I think there's interesting concepts. So is it more composition? Is it more improvisation? And that's also interesting for where leaders today are sometimes struggle with. And let's not talk about the technology, and maybe we can talk later about the ethics of it. But how can they use it? How can they also relate on maybe not only the gut feeling, but experience, a new kind of learning, analogies to compare, to make something extraordinary? Because at the very end, if everybody would use the same machine, maybe everything would look the same.
I think there are so many important things that in what you just said, and I want to pick out maybe the thing that resonates most with me, and that is, I strongly believe that it is not possible to make music in a solitary, cut-off way from the world around you. I think music always predicates that you are reacting to something, that you are working with something that is already there. It could be a historical model, it could be, an influence that you had, or it could be something that you're reacting against, or it could be a musician that you are on stage with, or it could be an audience, or it could be part of yourself where you have to overcome an obstacle or some kind of challenge that you have with maybe the way you hear, the way you feel, what you have learned in the past that you want to change. So music is always reacting to something. And I think this is the crucial point, because through this interaction with the things that are around us, we find our own voice. There's a Zen element to it, because, we can do it only surrounded by the world of music and reacting to it, but this is where we find our own voice. And it's not that there is this sort of, I think people who strongly believe in the sense of creative genius will not like what I say right now, because I'm saying that the individuality in art and in music comes from the cosmos of ideas that surround us.
But by the way, to bring in Brian Eno again, because he literally talks about this, he said music never had this genius, this one extraordinary, incredible person that could do it all. It was more a scenius, a certain scene of different people, maybe even the cafe where the creatives go to and where they meet each other. So the scene, that's much more important than just being one single genius. That resonates a lot with it. But why is there so much resistance in using AI?
I think what a lot of people don't see is that AI really is a collective memory of music. And you can, by using the AI that has been trained on the music of the past or of a certain genre or area, location, you can interact with this musical archive in a creative way. If you see it more like, well, there's this intelligence that has been trained on what all these people have done, and now they make a lot of money and they don't, then it's very difficult to see the potential of such a living archive that you can interact with. I'm not saying that they are wrong and I'm right. I'm saying that's another way of looking at it. And I think that there's also a very, very strong narrative still in our society about talent and genius and creativity being something reserved for artists. And normal people tend to think that maybe they are not creative, which is something that I don't subscribe to at all. I think creativity is just a universal human skill that we can train. It's almost like a muscle, and it's there for us to use, and we don't need any permission or education to be able to use it. And yeah, AI enables a lot of that. And I think this is the pushback that you sometimes get. It's the old narrative versus the new possibilities.
Yeah, and there are also, let's say, famous artists of the last century, like Joseph Beuys, who said everybody is an artist in some way. So literally, and funny enough that maybe the difference is how you get, let's say, paid for what you do as a creative. And that's something where, for example, Spotify is very much under fire, and extra under fire that they use AI generated and really only AI generated music. I think I heard about that. It's a third of everything on Spotify, and that they just do it so they don't have to pay the musicians. So the question is also like, there must be something if everybody now is a musician because they can use Suno, Udio, and everything. Is this the end of the music? Let's put this in air quotes. On the other hand, when we know Spotify a few years ago, they still tracked, I think, more than 6,200 genre types. And we just talked about classical music, which is maybe one genre type, or Baroque or anything else. But there are so many more. My question is, where does it lead to? And is there something that we have to decide? And then the big question is, who is we as a user to stop if you don't like it? Or do we have to come up with some kind of fair model, and that goes far behind actually or beyond our discussion about creativity and technology, because it's more about how can you make a living?
Yeah, so I want to go back to this idea of, as you said, a third is AI generated. Like, what does it mean, AI generated? Are we talking about really some files which encode musical information that was invented and executed purely by AIs? Or are we talking about something where a human says, I want to have a song that sounds like XYZ in the style of, I don't know, this artist? To me, the latter is not AI generated, because the instruction and the idea to produce this kind of music comes from a human being. This is a big I think a lot of people would say the latter is AI generated. Why? Because the human, they themselves did not produce, play the instruments, put down each note and so on. But for me, music is becoming a conceptual art now, where, you as an artist, you describe what you intend the output to be, and the AI does it for you. To me, and in my mind, that is not AI generated music. I understand why the music industry is framing it in the way they do it, because this is not about what comes from the machine versus what comes from the human. This is about how big is the pot of money that we distribute with whom. And the big labels and the big publishing houses, they say, well, that pot obviously is ours because we are the gatekeepers of what music is. We decide what goes on Spotify and other platforms. And now everyone is putting stuff there. And that's something that the professional world doesn't like. So that is a question about distribution of money. And then there's the question of fairness in sort of distributing this money. In a world where we talk about the influence and the ideas that something has on me as a composer, has a value for me as a composer, as an artist, and it will be part of my music. Now, does that mean that everything that I make as compensation for my music should be distributed with all of the people that have influenced my art? Or do I say, well, I have these influences, but I did something, I remixed it, I did something new with it, and therefore the money that my music makes goes to me only. This is a very fundamental question, and if we go down the road of saying, well, anything that comes from a collective memory system like an AI system should go only to the musicians who created the original artwork that the AI was trained on, well, then the same should be true also for humans. And if you listen to Beatles as a young kid and your music, takes those influences and you now have a band and you don't use any computers and fancy stuff, but still then that money should be distributed also to your influences. So these are different ways of looking at the whole discussion about the money. And I would invite everyone who is, very adamant about sort of the dichotomy between AI and human generated to think about that and have it sink in, because nothing that we do purely comes out of our own selves. We are always the result of our influences, social constructs and genes and biological processes. It's all one big thing. So I think this is a fundamental issue that is almost of a philosophical nature.
Absolutely. And with good philosophy, we want to find rules or instructions that help us to do good. That's most of the philosophies. And I think that's it's a very interesting discussion. And I think it's very hard. And maybe the most important thing is there is no black and white. There never is only black and white, and especially in this one, not. And maybe also it's like more, and you just mentioned it, maybe it's just not about AI or human or not human, but the question is who is earning a lot with what they are doing. And that's also something, if we cycle to the AI and get close to the AI ethics, we know that AI is using a lot of data centers, losing a lot of energy, a lot of water, and actually it's most of the time owned by billionaires. And to name one, what I just read last week is that the owners of ChatGPT, they donate 25 million to Trump, and ICE is also using ChatGPT. So I think that's also part of the discussion. So if we open it very much, that's something like from, hey, wow, how can we support this, and how can we mitigate the negative effects, and who says what a negative effect is? And so that's how we cycle from, let's say, from the from the innovation of Beethoven's 10th into what everybody who's listening now is in the middle of, from something like, should I use for my grocery list or for anything else, ChatGPT, like I'm teaching in Utrecht, the University of Applied Science, and the students there are allowed to use AI in the sense that they have to understand what it is and what it is not. And at the very end, I don't have really numbers for it, but my gut feeling is that maybe 10% is using it like, in a very innovative way. That 90% is just making a shortcut from A to B to get the easiest grade. And as an educator, there is something like, okay, I hear you. I have to understand. Do you understand what critical thinking is? And what shocked me most actually was that, and you mentioned it in some way similar, that students that just uploaded, let's say, the learning outcomes for what they have to do, including all the PDFs they could collect somewhere, and they create something where they think they are 100% the creative of it. That's for me sometimes very hard to grasp compared with other students. So not put everyone in the same basket, that really think about and really do a research about what are the right sources. Add something. Also, never start ideation, generating of ideas with ChatGPT, but first use their brain, their colleagues, their scene, what we just also mentioned, and only then give the right direction to AI. So what's your take on that? So now we are really
now we have two big topics, I think. One is this question of resources and AI. And the other one is the question of education and AI. On the resources, I think what's very important to see for us is that AI is quickly becoming a commodity in at least, the parts of the world where knowledge work is important. And this commoditization of generative AI means that we have to think a systematic way about how to integrate it into our lives. And I think right now we're not doing a good job with that. Especially in Europe, we are not putting extra effort into thinking how can AI flow to the people in the moment when they need it in a efficient way. That includes each one of us. So, for a simple task, you don't need to use Claude 4.6 and upload information to some server somewhere. Use all that infrastructure to get the information to that model, get the inference back, and then use it on your local machine. For simple tasks, you can do that on your own computer. It's sitting there idle anyhow. And you can actually compute on your laptop with a reasonably good large language model without having to go through 20 servers and using, that water-cooled data center in Ohio and get all that information back. No, you do it on your local machine. We don't always need to drive the Ferrari. Sometimes the bicycle is fine. And so where do people start with that? Well, most people are not taking the time and effort to learn how to run their AI locally because, it's not as convenient. So I think that's the first step. The second step, then we have to go through, questions of our politics in our regions, Can we have data centers nearby where we actually need more powered AI? Things like this. I don't think we're doing a great job on that. So there's a lot of room for improvement. On the education side, oh man, that's such an important topic because it becomes so clear that education is not about being able to perform a skill at an expected level or to know about certain things to a certain degree. No, education is always pushing yourself to your limit and growing personally. And the people who, like you say, most students will just give the task to the AI, get the answer, and hand it in. They are not growing. They're actually
absolutely
stagnating.
Yeah.
They're just hurting themselves. But our system is doing a bad job of making that clear to everyone, because the ones who push themselves every day, they're gonna grow exponentially at some point with all of that help, from systems around them, and it widens the gap tremendously. This is the biggest risk I see in uneducated use of AI.
Absolutely, and that's something that is debatable, and there's a lot of talk about it. And as you say, so because the students, they are allowed to use it, which is good. The question is only how can we help them to use it in the right way, and that part of convenience that you just mentioned. They are also. You might know the craftsman from Senate who argues for that when we learn a craft, that we have to learn the instrument, how it works. If we learn how a knife works, sometimes we might get hurt. And then let's hopefully use the smaller knives for smaller problems and not start with a very big one, and understand what's the impact of it. And you can cut a knife for your onions, but also can stab your neighbor. So there's also an ethical part and understanding in it, and hopefully AI is not directly involved in killing. However, it might be indirectly very much, but let's not go there too. But I think the interesting thing is, like, if you learn a craft, then you know how it works. And that's something that you mentioned. If we learn the craft, how to really understand our computer in the way that we don't do all these shortcuts, but that means that we are more in control. That's really something where I think, and that's a bit like when you're a bit older, like looking back on 30 years of computation, and then you see, hey, well, wow, that's how the internet, the commercial internet, let's say in the mid of the 90s started, and everything was possible. You could reach somewhere all over the world where people now smile and look at their Instagram. But at the very end, it was like a code in a Unix machine. But let's not be let's not look too much back. The question is, now we have a challenge where it would be an opportunity to really better understand our gear and do exactly this, to not have a negative impact. So let's not talk about the AI, but the impact of AI. So more about the tool. What can you do with the tool? So like we just compared it with AI is a knife. So, okay, what can you do with the knife and what can you do with AI? And how can we use it in a way that we don't harm people, whatever this may be exactly? And how can we use it for things that are something that we might have not imagined yet, because we can build something with that tool?
That wants me to go back to the idea of creativity. So creativity, you can look at it and say, like, oh, that's the skill of, or the ability to make art. But there is another way of looking at creativity, and that is it's finding novel ways to solve problems. And that is a much broader way of looking at creativity, right? There is a problem. It could be anything. It could be an artistic problem, a societal problem, or an engineering problem. And you use creativity and knowledge to find new ways of approaching that problem, and maybe you'll find a solution this way. That's what creativity does every day in our life. And there is yet another element to creativity, and that is being able to ask good questions. And what that unlocks, this ability to ask good questions, is to guide your imagination towards where you want to go. Finding that problem that isn't known to you yet, that your creativity is going to solve. And I believe that this ability to ask good questions and to see beyond what is known in the world of problems is going to be the key to these questions, to the question of how do we actually use that tool. This is going to take a lot of collaboration. It's going to take a lot of trial and error. But I do strongly believe that we're going to make the biggest progress if we can ask the right questions, find those questions that move us forward in bigger leaps. And this is where I think AI is also going to be a great help for us. But sometimes I'm a little bit disappointed at when I see how our education systems work, how our companies work, organizations, that I think we're still steeped into in sort of almost a medieval type of educational system. You mentioned the Netherlands. I think it's probably more advanced there than it is in other parts of Europe. But boy, sometimes I think like nothing has changed since my school days. Definitely not.
Maybe that's a good one to share because now I'm in education, let's say finally or eventually. The funny thing is that was not my goal. But the interesting thing is I was a very bad in school, but I was very good in university. And I think what I learned, and I want to pledge for that education is everywhere. Education is when we talk. Education is when we are out on the street and we argue, and we might not have always the same idea about something, but we talk. I think that's as important as education than just put it in houses or in very big houses with very, very, very many systems. So I think the learning is in between. That's also a chance for AI because it's now at your laptop. So you can learn. But that's something, and my open question would be, how can we help people to be their better self with the tools that they have at hand without harming or having an impact on something that we collectively not want, like talk about the climate or inequality, and how can we help them to explore something, come up with something new that we can't think about. And I want to cycle back because that's my hypothesis. You're a musician coming from playing classical or learning the classical guitar via Beethoven AI construction of the 10th Symphony until what you're doing now. So for me, that's a great example that musicians, if they're open, they can do quite a lot. And my question would be, or in my words, it's not the musician, but the music thinker, because there might be many musicians that are no music thinker because they just use their creativity just for music, which is not bad, but it's a decision. So I would like to hear from you, what be your definition of the good music thinker that could help us to walk our talk in with all the challenges that we have here?
Oh, this is such a great question, and I wish I knew. I just go with what interests me, and I follow this flow a lot. But I am reminded of one of the great songs by Daft Punk. I don't even know the title, but it's based around an interview with Giorgio Moroder. You know, the great composer of disco music and synthesizer music in the 70s and 80s. And later on. And Giorgio Moroder is interviewed by Daft Punk, and then they take the interview and construct a song around it. I mean, it's just a brilliant song. Maybe you can give it to the readers.
We'll put it in the show notes. So
yeah, exactly. So he says, once you leave behind the concept of that there is something right or wrong in music, you become free. Yeah. And I'm getting the goosebumps just saying it, because this is so important. Free yourself from fear and mental models of how the world is, and then just surf the wave. And that's what I'm doing right now with my company. I have never in my life slept so little, because I'm up until late at night learning about new things in AI and other fields. I'm applying it, I'm trying things out, and I've never been as happy in my life before with so little sleep. And it's just like an amazing point in my life. And I just go out and share what I learn. And I try to be a little bit ahead of maybe some other people and help them catch up with me as fast as possible. So it's like this joint race towards the new. And that's what my philosophy is.
Matthias, I think that was the best ending that we can have for this for this talk. I thank you very much. I will put everything in the show notes, everything how people can reach you. And thank you very much for sharing this all.
Thank you so much, Christoph, for doing this series and for having me as a guest. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate this, because listening is one of the top leadership skills, and I feel honored about this. It is my mission to find, create, and share inspirations for meaningful collaboration based on music analogies. If you want to support this, please subscribe to the podcast, give us a rating, or write a review on iTunes or Spotify. And more inspirations can be found on musicthinking.com. We have a blog, and you can download the Music Thinking Framework. And finally, I would love to hear your feedback. And if you need help with a business challenge, please reach out to me via email, podcast@musicthinking.com.